At 82, Jordan Baker stood barefoot on the cold concrete porch, her frail hands gripping a weathered wooden trunk, the only thing her son had allowed her to keep. Behind her, the door clicked shut, locked, final. Inside, Michael Baker avoided her eyes. Karen didn't even pretend to care. No goodbye, no hesitation, just silence. As a mother was erased from the life she had built with her own sacrifice. But what they didn't know, what no one could see, was that inside that old trunk lay a secret powerful enough to change everything. If you've ever wondered how far betrayal can go and how strong a forgotten heart can become, this story is for you. Stay with Jordan, because her ending is not what anyone expected. Long before the silence of that locked door, long before the weight of betrayal settled into her bones, Jordan Baker had been a woman defined by motion, by sacrifice, by endurance, by a quiet, unyielding determination that never once asked for recognition. In her early 30s, Jordan had not planned to become both mother and father, but life, as it often does, made the decision for her. When Robert Baker died in a sudden construction accident on a cold November morning, the world did not pause to let her grieve. It simply kept moving bills piling up. A frightened 8-year-old boy clinging to her side, and a future that no longer resembled anything she had imagined. Michael Baker had cried for days. Not loudly, not dramatically, just small, quiet sobs in the middle of the night when he thought no one could hear him. But Jordan always heard. She always heard everything when it came to her son. And so she made a promise, not out loud, not even fully formed in words, but etched deeply into her heart. He would never feel the absence of his father as a lack. Not in opportunity, not in stability, not in love. To keep that promise, Jordan began to disappear piece by piece. She took a second job cleaning offices at night after finishing long shifts at a local diner. Her hands, once soft and steady, grew rough and cracked from chemicals and constant labor. There were nights she returned home so exhausted she couldn't even remove her shoes before collapsing onto the couch. But when morning came, she was always up before Michael, preparing breakfast, pressing his clothes, making sure his world remained intact, even as hers quietly unraveled. She sold the last pieces of jewelry Robert had ever given her, small tokens of a life that now existed only in memory. She told Michael they were just things, that they didn't matter. What mattered was his future, his education, his chance to become something more than what life had offered them. There were winters when the heating bill went unpaid, so Michael could stay enrolled in school programs. Summers when Jordan worked triple shifts so he could attend camps with other children, smiling as she dropped him off, never letting him see the blistered feet hidden beneath her worn shoes. Michael grew up believing his life was normal, stable, secure. He never knew how close they had come to losing everything more times than Jordan could count. And Jordan never told him. Because to her, love was not something you explained. It was something you did. Years passed, and the boy who once clung to her leg grew into a young man with ambition in his eyes. He earned a scholarship to a state university, something Jordan celebrated quietly, standing alone in the kitchen after he left for campus, her hands trembling. Not from exhaustion this time, but from something deeper. Relief, pride, and a strange unfamiliar emptiness. For the first time in decades, Jordan did not know what to do with herself. Her entire identity had been built around being needed, around solving problems before they reached Michael, around carrying burdens so he would never have to feel their weight. Now the house was quiet, too quiet. She filled her time the only way she knew how, working, saving, preparing. Even as Michael became more independent, Jordan continued to live as though every dollar mattered, as though security was something fragile that could shatter at any moment. And perhaps in some way, she was right. When Michael graduated and secured a stable job in Chicago, Jordan felt a cautious sense of victory, not the loud celebratory kind, but a soft internal acknowledgement that everything she had endured had not been in vain. He had made it. That was enough. Or so she thought. When Michael introduced Karen to her a few years later, Jordan welcomed her with the same open heart she had always given so freely. Karen was polished, confident, with a smile that seemed warm but never quite reached her eyes. Still, Jordan chose not to question it. She had spent her entire life believing in the good in people. It was not in her nature to doubt, especially not the woman her son had chosen to love. As time passed, Michael visited less frequently. At first it was understandable. Work was demanding, life was busy. Jordan reassured herself of that whenever weeks turned into months between visits. Then calls became shorter, more distant, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. There was a subtle impatience in Michael's tone, a distraction, as though conversations with his mother had become obligations rather than connections. Jordan noticed. Of course she noticed, but she said nothing, because love to her had always meant enduring quietly. One evening during a rare visit home, Michael had glanced toward the corner of the living room where an old wooden trunk sat beneath a window. It was worn with age, its surface marked by time, its lock always secured. "Why do you still keep that thing?" he had asked casually. Jordan's reaction had been immediate, though she tried to hide it. Her hand instinctively moved toward the trunk, resting lightly on its surface. "It's just something your father left behind," she replied, her voice softer than usual. Michael shrugged, uninterested. To him it was just an old object, meaningless, outdated. But to Jordan, it was something else entirely. Something she had protected for decades. Something she had never explained. That night, after Michael and Karen had gone to bed, Jordan sat alone in the dim glow of a kitchen light. The house felt different when they were there, full, yet strangely unfamiliar. Her eyes drifted toward the trunk again. For a long moment, she simply stared at it, not with fear, not even with sadness, but with a quiet understanding. There were things in life you held on to, not because of their value, but because of the truth they carried. And some truths were not meant to be revealed until the world had taken everything else away. Jordan didn't know it yet, but that moment was the beginning of the end of one life, and the silent preparation for another. The shift didn't happen overnight. If someone had asked Jordan Baker when things began to change, she wouldn't have been able to give a clear answer. There was no single moment, no dramatic confrontation, no sudden fracture that shattered everything she believed in. Instead, it came quietly wrapped in concern, disguised as help, delivered with gentle words that felt at first like love. It began with small suggestions. "You shouldn't be worrying about bills anymore, Mom," Michael said one afternoon, standing in her kitchen, his sleeves rolled neatly as if he were preparing to fix something broken. Let me take care of it. You've done enough. Jordan had smiled at that. Not because she believed she was tired, but because the words touched something deep inside her. After decades of giving, of protecting, of carrying everything alone, the idea of someone finally taking care of her felt comforting, even if it was unfamiliar. "I'm doing just fine," she had replied gently, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. "I've managed all these years." "I know," Michael said, softer now. "That's exactly why you shouldn't have to anymore." Karen, sitting nearby, chimed in with a warm but calculated tone. "It's not about control, Jordan. It's about making things easier, safer. You shouldn't have to worry about making mistakes with finances at your age." The words were subtle, but they lingered. Jordan had never thought of herself as fragile. Even at 80, she still moved with quiet purpose, still kept her home in order, still balanced every expense with careful precision. But hearing it framed that way at your age planted a seed she hadn't realized was there. Doubt. Not in her ability, but in her place. Over the following weeks, Michael's visits became more frequent, but different. He no longer came just to talk or spend time. He came with documents, with plans, with suggestions that felt less like options and more like decisions already made. "It's just a formality," he reassured her one evening, sliding a folder across the table. "This will let me manage your accounts, pay bills on time, make sure everything runs smoothly." Jordan hesitated, not visibly, not in a way that would raise concern, but internally, something paused. She glanced at the papers. The words blurred together: legal terms, authorizations, permissions. It all felt unnecessarily complicated for something that was being presented as simple. "You trust me, don't you?" Michael asked. It wasn't accusatory, but it wasn't neutral either. Jordan looked at her son, really looked at him. The same boy she had once held through nightmares, the same child whose tears had once broken her heart more than anything else in the world. Trust had never been a question, so she nodded. "Of course I do." And she signed. That first signature changed everything. Though nothing appeared different at first, bills were paid, accounts were managed, life continued as it always had, quiet, structured, predictable. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, Jordan began to feel displaced. Statements stopped arriving in her mailbox. Bank notifications were redirected. When she asked simple questions about balances, about expenses, Michael would respond with quick, dismissive reassurances. "It's handled, Mom. You don't need to worry about it." Karen's tone was less gentle. "Honestly, Jordan, it's better this way. Finances can get confusing. We're just making sure nothing slips through the cracks." Jordan nodded each time, but something didn't sit right. It wasn't the actions themselves, it was the absence of clarity. The way decisions were being made around her, not with her. The way her role in her own life was slowly being reduced to observation. Still, she said nothing. Because confrontation had never been her way. Because doubt once planted can grow quietly if left unchallenged. And because part of her, perhaps the part that had spent a lifetime sacrificing, believed that maybe this was what letting go was supposed to feel like. Then came the conversation about the house. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that begins without warning and ends with something irreversible. "You've been here a long time," Mom Michael said, leaning casually against the kitchen counter. "But have you ever thought about downsizing?" Jordan looked up from the dish she was drying, her movements slowing. "This is my home," she said simply. "I know," he replied quickly. "And it's a great home. But it's also a lot. Maintenance, property taxes, repairs. It doesn't make sense for you to handle all that alone anymore." Karen stepped in, her voice smooth, persuasive. "There are beautiful senior communities nearby. Safe, clean, full of people your age. You'd have company, activities, support." The words sounded reasonable, logical, even kind. But they didn't feel right. "I'm not alone," Jordan said quietly. "I've lived here for decades. I know every inch of this place." Michael exhaled as if preparing himself. "We're not saying you have to leave right away," he said. "Just consider it. Think about what's best for you." Jordan nodded again, but this time the doubt felt heavier. Not about herself, but about them. Days passed, then weeks. The topic came up again, more directly this time. "We've been looking at options," Karen said one evening, placing brochures on the table. "Places where you'd be more comfortable." "I'm comfortable here," Jordan replied, her voice still calm but firmer now. Michael's patience began to thin. "Mom, this isn't just about comfort. It's about practicality. You can't keep managing this place forever." The words hit differently, not because they were untrue, but because of how they were said. Final, decided, as though her opinion was no longer part of the equation. "I never asked for help managing it," Jordan said softly. The room fell silent. For a brief moment, something shifted, something real, something close to confrontation. But it passed. Because Jordan let it pass. Because she had spent a lifetime avoiding conflict in the name of peace. And because deep down she still believed, still hoped, that her son would never truly act against her. What she didn't realize was that the decision had already been made. The papers had already been signed. Not by her, but because of her. The legal authority she had given Michael, the trust she had placed in him without question, had quietly transferred control of everything she owned, including the house. Jordan continued her days as if nothing had changed. She watered the plants, cleaned the kitchen, sat by the window in the evenings, her eyes occasionally drifting toward the old wooden trunk resting in its usual place. Unmoved, untouched, constant, unlike everything else. Sometimes she would place her hand on its surface, not opening it, not even reaching for the lock, just resting there as if grounding herself in something that still belonged to her, something that had not been taken, something that still held truth. Because somewhere deep inside, beyond the doubt, beyond the quiet unease that had begun to settle into her chest, Jordan felt it. The sense that something was coming, something she could not yet see, but something that would change everything. And when it did, the truth inside that trunk would no longer remain hidden. The morning it happened felt strangely ordinary. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, settling softly across the table, where Jordan Baker sat with her usual cup of tea. The house was quiet, too quiet, but she had grown used to that kind of silence. It had been her companion for years now, long before anything began to change. She didn't know this would be the last morning she would ever sit there as the owner of that home. Michael arrived just before noon. Not alone. Karen followed closely behind him, her expression composed, her movements precise. There was something rehearsed in the way they entered, no hesitation, no small talk, no lingering warmth that once defined family visits. Jordan noticed immediately. Mothers always do. "You're early," she said gently, placing her cup down. "I wasn't expecting you today." Michael didn't smile. "We need to talk," he said. 3 words. Simple, but heavy in a way that made the air shift. Jordan nodded slowly, gesturing for them to sit. She remained standing for a moment longer, as if instinctively bracing herself, though she couldn't yet explain why. Karen took a seat first, crossing her legs neatly. Michael remained standing, pacing slightly, as though searching for the right place to begin. Then he stopped. "It's time, Mom." Jordan frowned, her brow tightening just slightly. "Time for what?" Michael exchanged a quick glance with Karen, so quick most people might have missed it. But Jordan didn't. She had spent a lifetime reading unspoken things. "We've sold the house," Karen said, her tone smooth, almost clinical. The words landed without sound. For a moment, Jordan didn't react. Not because she didn't understand, but because her mind refused to process it. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "What did you just say?" Michael stepped forward, his voice more direct now. "The house is sold. It's finalized. The paperwork went through last week." Jordan's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "That's not possible," she said. "This is my house." Karen leaned slightly forward, her voice still calm but firmer now. "Legally, it hasn't been in your name for months, Jordan. You signed over financial authority. Remember? Michael handled everything." Jordan's breath caught, not sharply, but deeply, like something inside her had suddenly collapsed inward. "No," she whispered. It wasn't denial. It was realization. Every paper she had signed, every formality, every moment she had chosen trust over doubt. It all rushed back, clear, now, undeniable. "You didn't just manage things," she said, her voice trembling, not from weakness, but from the weight of understanding. "You took them." Michael's jaw tightened. "We did what was necessary." "Necessary," Jordan repeated softly. Karen stepped in before Michael could respond. "You can't live here alone anymore. This house is too much. The maintenance, the costs, it doesn't make sense. We found a buyer willing to move quickly. It was the best option for who?" Jordan asked. The question hung in the air. Michael exhaled sharply. "For everyone," he said, "including you." Jordan looked at him then, not as a mother looks at her child, but as someone seeing a stranger wearing a familiar face. "And where exactly am I supposed to go?" she asked. Karen's answer came immediately. "We've arranged a place for you." Jordan waited. A pause. Too long. "What kind of place?" she asked. Michael hesitated just for a fraction of a second. "A facility," he said. "It's comfortable, structured. You'll have everything you need." Everything you need. The phrase echoed in Jordan's mind. Not everything you want. Not everything you deserve. Just what they decided was enough. "I'm not going," she said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was firm in a way that surprised even her. Karen's expression didn't change, but something colder settled behind her eyes. You don't really have a choice, she replied. Jordan straightened slightly, her frail frame carrying a strength that had not disappeared, only been overlooked. This is my home. Michael's voice hardened. Not anymore. Silence followed. Heavy. Final. And in that silence, something inside Jordan shifted, not broken, not shattered, but clarified. The illusion was gone. The belief that love would always protect her. The assumption that her sacrifices meant something permanent. They didn't. Not to them. Not anymore. When do I have to leave? She asked. Karen stood smoothing her coat as if concluding a business meeting. Today? The word struck with more force than anything else. Today, Jordan repeated. The new owners take possession this afternoon, Michael said. We've already packed what you need. Jordan turned slowly, her eyes scanning the room. The walls she had painted, the furniture. She had repaired the space that had held every memory of her life. And suddenly, it wasn't hers anymore. Not even for one more night. She walked quietly down the hallway, her step measured, controlled. She didn't rush. She didn't cry. She simply moved. Into her bedroom, toward the corner where the old wooden trunk sat, untouched, unmoved, waiting. Michael followed her. You don't need to take that, he said casually. It's just old junk. We can replace anything inside. Jordan stopped. Slowly she turned to face him. For the first time that day, there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not sadness, not confusion, but something sharper. You can replace everything, she asked. Michael shrugged. Pretty much. Jordan's hand rested firmly on the trunk. No, she said quietly. You can't. There was no anger in her voice. No accusation, just truth. She bent slightly, her movements careful, deliberate, and lifted the trunk. It was heavier than it looked, but she didn't struggle, not visibly, because this was the one thing she would not leave behind. Karen appeared in the doorway, watching with quiet impatience. We don't have time for this, she said. Jordan walked past her without responding, through the hallway, through the living room, out the front door. Each step felt like a closing chapter, but she didn't look back, because there was nothing left behind that still belonged to her. The door shut, this time, not by her. And as the lock clicked into place from the inside, Jordan Baker stood once again on the outside of a life she had built with her own hands, alone, at 82, with nothing except a single wooden trunk and a truth no one else understood. The bus station smelled faintly of diesel, and something older, like time, had settled into its walls and never quite left. Jordan Baker sat alone on a hard plastic bench, her wooden trunk resting upright beside her, one frail hand still gripping its handle, as if letting go even for a second might cause it to disappear. Around her, life moved without noticing. People rushed past with headphones and eyes fixed on glowing screens. A young mother struggled to calm a crying toddler. A man in a business suit barked into his phone, pacing with urgency. No one looked at Jordan. No one asked why an 82-year-old woman sat there with nowhere to go. And strangely, that invisibility felt familiar. She had spent most of her life being unseen. Not ignored, but overlooked. Quietly present, constantly giving, never demanding attention. It had never bothered her before. But now, sitting in that station with everything she owned reduced to a single trunk, The silence around her felt heavier, not empty, just final. A voice crackled overhead announcing departures. Jordan glanced at the board, her eyes searching, not randomly, but with intention. She wasn't lost. Not completely. Because somewhere deep in her memory, beneath decades of routine and responsibility, there had always been a place she never forgot. A place Robert had once shown her. A place he had spoken about only once. Missouri. The name appeared on the board, half-faded, easy to miss. But she didn't miss it. Her fingers tightened slightly around the trunk handle. That was where she needed to go. She didn't question the thought, didn't analyze it. Some instincts are older than logic. She rose slowly, her body stiff but steady, and made her way toward the ticket counter. The clerk barely looked up. "Where to?" "Missouri," Jordan said quietly. The woman typed something, printed a ticket, and slid it across the counter. "Bus leaves in 20 minutes. Jordan nodded, placing a few worn bills on the counter. No conversation, no curiosity, just another transaction, another departure. She took the ticket and returned to her seat, waiting. When the bus finally arrived, it did so with a long hiss of air brakes, like a tired breath released after a long journey. Jordan boarded last. Not because she was slow, but because she had learned over the years that stepping forward too soon often meant being pushed aside. The driver glanced at her briefly, then at the trunk. "Need help with that?" Jordan shook her head. "I've got it." And she did. She always had. The ride was long. Hours stretched into something shapeless, marked only by the shifting light outside the window and the quiet hum of the engine beneath her feet. Jordan sat by the window, her gaze drifting across landscapes that slowly transformed from crowded city streets to open highways, from concrete and steel to fields that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The further they traveled, the quieter the world seemed to become. And with that quiet, something inside her began to settle. Not heal. Not yet, but steady. Memories surfaced, not sharply, not painfully, but gently, like echoes returning from a distance. Robert's voice, low, calm, certain. If there ever comes a day when everything else is gone, you'll know where to go. She hadn't understood it then. Back when life still made sense. Back when loss hadn't carved its way through her future. She had laughed it off, brushing it aside as one of Robert's many thoughtful but unnecessary precautions. But now those words felt different. Not distant, but precise. As if he had seen something she couldn't. As if he had known. The bus stopped twice along the way. Passengers got on, others got off. Jordan remained, still, quiet, waiting. As the sun began to set, the sky turned a deep amber, casting long shadows across the fields outside. The world looked softer in that light, less harsh, less defined. For the first time since that door had closed behind her, Jordan allowed herself to breathe differently, deeper. Not because things were better, but because something ahead felt certain. The bus finally slowed as it approached a small, nearly forgotten town. There was no grand station, no bustling crowd, just a narrow road, a flickering street lamp, and a sign that had seen better days. The driver turned slightly. "This is your stop." Jordan nodded. She stood carefully lifting the trunk once more, her hands steady despite the weight. As she stepped off the bus, the cool evening air wrapped around her, clean, quiet, untouched by the noise she had left behind. The bus drove away without ceremony, and just like that, she was alone again. But this time, it felt different. Not abandoned, not entirely, just at the beginning of something she didn't yet understand. The town was small, barely more than a handful of buildings scattered along a single road. Most windows were dark. The few that remained lit cast a warm, distant glow that didn't quite reach the street. Jordan adjusted her grip on the trunk and began to walk. She didn't ask for directions, didn't stop anyone, because the place she was looking for wasn't on any map. It lived in memory, in fragments, in something deeper than location. Her steps were slow but deliberate, leading her away from the town toward a narrow dirt path that cut through overgrown land. The further she walked, the quieter it became. No traffic, no voices, just the soft rustle of wind through tall grass and the distant call of something unseen in the trees. It should have felt unsettling, but it didn't, because with each step, something inside her grew clearer, more certain. The path narrowed, almost disappearing beneath layers of neglect. Branches brushed against her coat, the ground uneven beneath her feet. But she didn't stop, not once, until finally she saw it, barely visible through the trees. A structure, old, weathered, almost swallowed by time. A cabin. Jordan stood still for a long moment, her breath catching, not from exhaustion, but from recognition. This was it. The place Robert had shown her all those years ago. The place she had never returned to. Until now. The cabin leaned slightly, its wood faded, its windows clouded with dust. The door hung unevenly on its hinges, as if waiting, not for anyone but for something unfinished. Jordan stepped forward slowly, her eyes tracing every detail, every memory, aligning with what stood before her. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. She approached the door, paused, then gently pushed it open. It creaked, not loudly, but enough to echo through the stillness inside. The air was stale, heavy with years of abandonment, but beneath it, there was something else, something familiar. Jordan stepped inside, setting the trunk down just beyond the doorway. Her eyes moved across the space, simple, worn, untouched by time. And in that moment, standing in the quiet of that forgotten place, with nothing left behind her and everything uncertain ahead, Jordan Baker realized something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. She hadn't reached the end. She had arrived at the beginning. The cabin smelled of dust pine and something faintly metallic, like old tools left untouched for too long. Jordan Baker stood just inside the doorway, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the wooden trunk she had carried all this way. For a moment, she didn't move. It wasn't fear that held her still. It was recognition. Not of the place itself. Time had changed too much for that, but of the feeling. A quiet, familiar presence that settled into her chest, as though something long buried had been waiting patiently for her return. She stepped further inside. The floor creaked beneath her weight, each step echoing softly through the empty space. Dust stirred in the fading light that slipped through the cracked windows, drifting lazily in the air like forgotten memories. There was a small table against one wall, its surface worn but intact. A rusted lantern hung from a hook near the door. In the far corner, a narrow bed frame sat bare, the mattress long gone, its springs exposed like ribs. Everything was exactly as it had been left, abandoned, but not destroyed. Jordan exhaled slowly, setting the trunk down beside the table. Her hands lingered on it for a moment, fingers tracing the familiar grooves in the wood. "You kept your promise," she murmured softly. It wasn't clear whether she was speaking to herself or to Robert. The memory came back not as a single image, but as a series of fragments, pieces of a day she had almost forgotten. It had been years ago, not long after they were married. Robert had taken her out of the city, driving for hours without explanation. She had asked where they were going, but he had only smiled in that quiet way of his, as though the answer mattered less than the journey. When they arrived, it had been summer. The land was greener then, alive. The cabin, though modest, had been cared for, paint still clinging to its walls, the door straight on its hinges, the windows clear. Jordan had laughed when she saw it. "You brought me all this way for a broken cabin," she teased. Robert hadn't laughed. Instead, he had walked ahead, opening the door, stepping inside, as though entering something sacred. "Not broken," he said quietly. "Just waiting." Jordan followed him in her eyes, scanning the small space. "It's beautiful," she admitted, though she didn't quite understand why. Robert turned to face her, then his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "If there ever comes a day," he said slowly, choosing each word with care, "when everything else is gone, I want you to come back here." Jordan frowned slightly. Why would everything be gone? Robert didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, taking her hands in his grip firm grounding. "Just promise me," he said. She studied his face, searching for humor, for reassurance that this was just another one of his thoughtful but unnecessary concerns. But she found none, only certainty. So she nodded. "I promise." At the time, the moment had felt strange but not important. Now, it felt like everything. Jordan blinked, the memory fading as the present settled back around her. The cabin stood quiet once more. Only now it carried meaning, purpose. She moved slowly through the space, her hand brushing lightly against the table, the wall, the frame of the window. Each surface told a story, not of what had been lost, but of what had been preserved. Robert hadn't abandoned this place. He had left it intact, as if he had known someone would need it again. Her gaze returned to the trunk. It sat exactly where she had placed it, silent, patient, unchanged. For decades, it had followed her from one place to another, never opened, never explained. A constant in a life that had otherwise shifted again and again. She had protected it without question, without understanding, until now. Jordan approached it slowly. Her heart didn't race. There was no sudden surge of fear or anticipation, only a quiet awareness that this moment had been waiting for her long before she realized it existed. She knelt carefully beside the trunk, her joints stiff but steady. The metal latch caught the dim light, dulled by time but still strong. For a moment, her hand hovered above it, not hesitating, but acknowledging everything that had led here, everything that had been taken, everything that had remained hidden. "You knew," she whispered softly. Her fingers closed around the latch, and gently, she opened it. The sound was small, a soft click. But in the stillness of the cabin, it echoed like something far greater. The lid creaked as she lifted it, revealing the contents inside. At first glance, it didn't look like much. Bundles of paper, old envelopes, a small metal box tucked neatly into one corner. Everything carefully arranged. Everything preserved. Jordan reached in, slowly lifting the top layer of documents. The paper was thick, official legal forms, neatly folded edges still crisp despite their age. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the next. Her breath caught, not in shock, but in realization. Land deeds, property records, her name, Robert's name, dates that stretched back decades. She pulled another document free, her fingers trembling slightly, now not from weakness, but from the weight of what she was beginning to understand. Mineral rights, ownership agreements, legal protections, all tied to this land, all legally binding, all still valid. Jordan sat back slightly, the papers resting in her lap as her mind tried to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. This wasn't just a cabin. It wasn't just a forgotten piece of land. It was something far more, something valuable, something precious. Her gaze shifted to the metal box. She reached for it, opening it with careful hands. Inside, neatly stacked, were letters, each one addressed in Robert's handwriting, each one sealed but labeled, her name written clearly across the top. Jordan picked up the first letter. Her fingers traced the familiar curve of his handwriting, her chest tightening as something deeper than memory stirred within her. He had left this for her. Not as a surprise, not as a secret, but as a plan, a safeguard, a promise fulfilled. She didn't open the letter yet, not immediately, because in that moment, surrounded by the quiet of the cabin, with the truth slowly unfolding around her, Jordan Baker realized something that changed everything. She had not been left with nothing. She had been guided here, protected, prepared, and for the first time since that door had closed behind her, she understood. This was not where her life ended. This was where it truly began. For a long moment, Jordan Baker simply sat there on the worn wooden floor, the metal box resting in her lap, the first letter still unopened in her trembling hands. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees, brushing against the cabin walls like a distant whisper. The world remained quiet, unaware that inside this forgotten place, everything was changing. Jordan stared at the envelope. Her name was written in Robert's handwriting, steady, deliberate, unmistakable. He had written this knowing she would one day read it. Not if, but when. Her fingers moved slowly, carefully, breaking the seal. The paper inside slid free with a soft rustle, the sound almost too loud in the stillness. She unfolded it and began to read. My dearest Jordan, if you are reading this, it means life has taken something from you. Maybe more than something. Maybe everything. Jordan's breath caught slightly, her eyes scanning the words with growing intensity. I wish I could say I didn't expect that, but I've seen enough of the world to know how easily good people can be left with nothing. Her grip tightened on the paper. That's why I built this for you. Not as a gift, not as an inheritance, but as protection. Tears welled in her eyes, though she didn't wipe them away. This land is more than it appears. Beneath it are mineral deposits that were discovered years ago, valuable enough that I knew someday someone might try to take advantage of it. Or of you. Jordan's heart began to beat faster now, not with fear, but with realization. So I made sure that couldn't happen. Her eyes moved quickly over the next lines. Everything is in your name. Every document, every right, every protection. But I also made sure it would stay hidden until you needed it most. The words blurred slightly as tears filled her vision. I didn't tell you everything back then because I didn't want this to change how you lived your life. I wanted you to live freely, not guarded by wealth, not shaped by fear. Jordan's lips parted, a quiet breath escaping her. But if the day ever came when you had nowhere else to go, I needed you to have somewhere no one could take from you. Her hand trembled now, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming weight of what she was reading. This is your place, Jordan. It always has been. A tear slipped down her cheek, landing softly on the paper. And if you found your way here, then I trust that you'll know what to do next. The letter ended simply, with all my love always, Robert. Silence filled the cabin again, but it was no longer empty. It was full of truth, of understanding, of something Jordan hadn't felt in a very long time. Security. Real, undeniable security. She lowered the letter slowly, her gaze drifting back to the documents spread around her. Land deeds, ownership rights, legal protections that stretched back decades, carefully structured, meticulously preserved. Robert hadn't just left her a memory. He had left her a future. And more than that, he had ensured that no one else could take it from her. Not through manipulation, not through trust misplaced, not even through family. Jordan let out a long, steady breath, her shoulders rising and falling as something deep inside her began to shift. All those years, she had believed that everything she built was for Michael, that her sacrifices would become his foundation, that her love would protect her place in his life. But now, sitting here with the truth laid bare in front of her, she understood something she had never allowed herself to consider. She had not been building security for herself. She had been giving it away, piece by piece, choice by choice, trust by trust, until there was nothing left. Or at least, that's what she thought. A faint, almost incredulous smile touched her lips. They thought I had nothing, she whispered softly. The words felt strange, like speaking a truth that had been hidden too long. Her eyes moved again across the documents. The mineral rights alone, if the estimates were correct, were worth well over $1 million. Possibly more, depending on development. But it wasn't just the value that struck her. It was the intention behind it. Robert hadn't created this to make her rich. He had created it to make her safe, to give her something that couldn't be taken through kindness, or guilt, or love. Jordan reached for another letter, hesitating only briefly before opening it. This one was shorter, more direct. Jordan, there will come a moment when someone realizes what this land is worth. When they do, they may try to convince you they deserve a part of it. They don't. Not unless you choose it freely. Remember this. What you give out of love is a gift. What is taken from you is something else entirely. Her chest tightened as she read the final line. Don't confuse the two. Jordan folded the letter slowly, her fingers pressing along the crease as if sealing the meaning into place. For years she had confused them, had believed that sacrifice was proof of love, that giving everything was what made her a good mother, that enduring quietly was what kept peace. But now she saw the difference. Clear, unavoidable. What had been taken from her was not love. It was betrayal. And for the first time since that door had closed behind her, Jordan Baker didn't feel broken. She felt awake. She gathered the documents, carefully stacking them with renewed purpose. The trunk was no longer just something she protected out of habit. It was evidence. It was power. It was truth. She placed the letters back into the metal box, her movements deliberate, now controlled, not hesitant. Outside, the wind shifted slightly, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and something deeper beneath it. Minerals. Hidden value. Just like Robert had said. Jordan stood slowly, her body still carrying the weight of age, but no longer the weight of uncertainty. She walked to the doorway of the cabin, stepping just outside into the cool evening air. The land stretched out before her, wild, untamed waiting. It didn't look like much. Not yet. But she knew what lay beneath it. And more importantly, she knew what it meant. "This is mine," she said quietly. Not with pride, not with defiance, but with clarity. For the first time in decades, Jordan Baker wasn't holding on to something out of fear of losing it. She was standing on something that could never be taken, and somewhere far away in a life she had already left behind. The people who thought they had erased her were about to learn a truth they never saw coming. Because the woman they abandoned with nothing had just found everything. The first morning, Jordan Baker woke up in the cabin. The silence felt different. It wasn't heavy like the silence she had known in her old house after Michael stopped calling. It wasn't hollow like the silence of the bus station where no one saw her. This silence breathed. Soft wind moved through the trees outside, brushing gently against the wooden walls. Somewhere in the distance, birds called to each other, simple, unhurried sounds that reminded her the world continued regardless of what had been taken or lost. Jordan sat up slowly on the makeshift bed she had arranged the night before. Layers of old fabric she had found in a storage chest tucked beneath the cabin floorboards. Her body ached, her joints stiff from travel and unfamiliar surroundings. But beneath the discomfort, there was something new. A quiet steadiness. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't waking up to serve someone else's life. She was waking up to her own. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, taking a moment to steady herself before walking toward the window. Morning light spilled across the land outside, revealing what the darkness had hidden the night before. The property was larger than it first appeared. Acres of overgrown land stretched beyond the cabin, wild grass, scattered trees, patches of uneven soil. It looked neglected, forgotten, but not lifeless. Jordan stepped outside, the cool air brushing against her skin. She stood there for a moment, letting herself take it in, not just the land, but the feeling of standing on something that was hers. Truly hers. No documents hidden behind someone else's control. No quiet manipulation. No conditions. Just truth. Her gaze moved slowly across the property, and for the first time she didn't see ruin. She saw possibility. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was there. Small. Steady. Real. A faint rumble of an engine broke the stillness. Jordan turned slightly, her eyes narrowing as an old pickup truck approached. Along the narrow dirt path, she had taken the night before. It moved slowly, as though the driver knew the terrain well or respected it enough not to rush. The truck came to a stop a few yards away. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened and a man stepped out. He looked to be in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. Broad-shouldered, weathered by years of physical work, his movements deliberate but unhurried. His clothes were simple, worn denim, a faded jacket, boots that had seen more ground than most people ever would. He studied Jordan for a moment, not with suspicion, but with quiet curiosity. "You're new," he said finally. His voice was low, steady, not unfriendly. Jordan nodded once. "I suppose I am." The man glanced toward the cabin, then back at her. "That place hasn't had anyone in it for years," he said. "Didn't think anyone still had claim to it." Jordan straightened slightly. "I do." He raised an eyebrow, not challenging, just acknowledging. "Well," he said after a brief pause, "that's something." Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just unfilled. "I'm Ethan Cole," he added, extending a hand. Jordan hesitated for only a second before stepping forward and taking it. "Jordan Baker." His grip was firm but not overpowering. "Didn't expect to see someone out here alone," Ethan said, releasing her hand. "Especially not someone your age." Jordan gave a small, almost amused exhale. "Neither did I." Ethan glanced at the cabin again. "You planning to stay?" Jordan followed his gaze. "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. He nodded slowly, as if weighing something. "That place is going to need work," he said. "Roof foundation, probably wiring too, if there's anything left of it." "I figured," Jordan replied. Ethan studied her for another moment longer this time. "You got help?" Jordan shook her head. "No." Another pause. Then Ethan exhaled lightly, glancing back at his truck. "I've got some tools," he said. "And time." Jordan looked at him, really looked this time. There was no hidden motive in his expression, no calculation, just a simple offer. And yet, after everything she had been through, trust didn't come easily. Not anymore. "You don't even know me," she said quietly. Ethan shrugged. "Don't need to." He gestured slightly toward the land. "Place like this, it either breaks people or rebuilds them. Figure anyone willing to stand out here and say they're staying probably deserves a fair shot." Jordan felt something shift in her chest. Not emotional, not overwhelming, just recognition of something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Genuine kindness, without expectation, without condition. She nodded once. "I'd appreciate that." Ethan gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "All right then." The work began that same day. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden transformation, just small, deliberate steps. Ethan showed her how to reinforce the cabin door, how to clear debris safely, how to identify what could be salvaged and what needed replacing. Jordan worked beside him, not watching, not waiting, but participating. Her movements were slower, her strength limited, but her determination made up for it. Hours passed without much conversation, but it didn't feel empty. It felt steady. By late afternoon, the cabin already looked different. Still worn, still imperfect, but standing a little straighter, holding together a little better. Jordan wiped her hands on a cloth, stepping back to look at what they had done. "It's not much," she said. Ethan glanced at the structure, then back at her. It's a start. Jordan nodded. A start. That was all she needed. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land, Ethan gathered his tools. I'll come back tomorrow, he said. If that's all right. Jordan met his gaze. It is. He nodded once, then climbed back into his truck. As the engine started and the vehicle disappeared down the dirt path, Jordan stood alone again, but not in the same way as before. This time the silence felt different. Not empty, not final, but full of something she hadn't felt in years. Momentum. She turned back toward the cabin, her eyes drifting briefly to the trunk sitting just inside the doorway. It was still there, still holding everything that had changed her life. But for the first time, she realized something important. The trunk had given her the truth. But this land, this work, this moment, this was what she would build from it. Not just survival, not just security, but something more. Something meaningful. Jordan stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her. The light faded slowly through the windows, leaving the cabin in a quiet, peaceful dimness. And as she settled in for the night, her body tired, but her mind clear, Jordan Baker understood something she hadn't allowed herself to believe before. She wasn't just rebuilding a place. She was rebuilding herself. The rumor didn't start loudly. It never does. It began as a quiet observation, something noticed mentioned, once then passed along with a hint of curiosity. A truck seen driving out toward the old Bakerland more often than usual. Supplies being unloaded. Lights flickering at night where darkness had lived for years. In a small town, change is never invisible, and neither is opportunity. It took less than 3 weeks for word to reach someone who knew exactly what that land was worth. Miles away in a polished office, far removed from dust and dirt roads, a man reviewed a report that should have meant nothing, but didn't. A property once considered dormant, now active, occupied, developing. The name attached to it was one he hadn't expected to see. Jordan Baker. He leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping lightly against the desk, as something cold and calculating settled behind his expression. That's interesting, he murmured, because buried beneath that land, something most people didn't know, something most had forgotten, was value. Significant value. And if Jordan Baker was alive and in possession of it, then someone else had made a very expensive mistake. Across the state line, in a suburban home that no longer belonged to her, Michael Baker sat at his dining table, flipping absent-mindedly through a stack of mail. Most of it was routine bills, advertisements, things he barely paid attention to anymore. Until one envelope caught his eye. It wasn't addressed to him, not directly, but the name was unmistakable. Jordan Baker. He frowned slightly, turning it over in his hands. How did this even get it here? He muttered. Karen glanced up from across the room. What is it? Something for my mom. Michael said, his tone casual, but his eyes narrowing slightly as he opened it. He scanned the contents quickly at first, then slower, then again. What Karen asked, noticing the shift in his expression. Michael didn't answer immediately, because what he was reading didn't make sense. Not at first. Mineral rights, property reassessment, estimated value. he murmured, his voice trailing off. Karen stood, walking over to him. Let me see that. She took the paper from his hands, her eyes moving rapidly across the page. And then she stopped. Completely. This can't be right, she said sharply. Michael looked at her. What? She held the paper up, pointing to a specific line. This land, this property, it's worth. She paused, recalculating her breath, catching slightly. Over $1 million, she finished. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Impossible. Michael leaned forward, grabbing the paper again, reading it himself. No, that doesn't make sense, he said. That cabin, that land, it's nothing. It's always been nothing. Karen's expression hardened. Clearly it's not. Silence followed. But it wasn't confusion. It was realization. Sharp, sudden, and deeply unsettling. Michael's mind raced back through conversations, through documents, through every decision they had made. The financial control, the house sale, the assumption that Jordan had nothing left, that everything of value had already been taken. Except it hadn't. She knew, Karen said quietly. Michael shook his head. No, she couldn't have known. If she did, Jan, she would have said something. Or Karen countered, her voice colder. Now she was waiting. The possibility shifted something inside him, not just concern, but something closer to panic. Because if Jordan had access to something worth that much, then everything had changed. She's out there alone, Michael said, more to himself than to Karen. And sitting on a fortune, Karen replied. Their eyes met. No words needed to be spoken. The decision formed instantly. We need to find her, Michael said. Karen nodded. Before someone else does. Back in Missouri, Jordan Baker stood at the edge of her property watching as Ethan secured the final beam along the cabin's outer wall. Days had turned into a rhythm. Work in the morning, repairs through the afternoon. Quiet evenings filled with reflection, not on what she had lost, but on what she was slowly building. The land had begun to take shape, paths cleared, structures reinforced. Small changes, but meaningful ones. You're getting faster, Ethan said, stepping back to examine his work. Jordan allowed herself a small smile. Or maybe you're just a good teacher, Ethan shrugged. Maybe both. He wiped his hands on a cloth, glancing out across the land. You planning anything bigger with this place? He asked casually. Jordan followed his gaze. I don't know yet, she admitted. But I think it's meant for more than just me. Ethan nodded as if he had expected that answer. Well, whatever you decide, you've got something solid here. Jordan looked down briefly, her eyes drifting toward the cabin, toward the trunk inside, toward everything it had revealed. I know, she said quietly, and she did. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't see yet, was how quickly that truth would reach beyond this place. A car appeared on the distant road. Unfamiliar. Out of place. Jordan noticed it immediately. So did Ethan. That yours? He asked. Jordan shook her head slowly. No. The vehicle moved closer, its tires crunching against gravel, breaking the stillness that had defined this place for weeks. Jordan felt it before she fully understood it. Not fear, not exactly, but something else. A shift, a disruption, the past, catching up. The car came to a stop. The engine turned off, and for a moment, everything went quiet again. Too quiet. Then the door opened, and Michael Baker stepped out. Jordan didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react, not outwardly, but inside, everything stilled. Because the life she had left behind, the betrayal, the loss, the silence, it had found her again. And this time, it wasn't coming quietly. Michael Baker hesitated for only a fraction of a second after stepping out of the car. It was subtle, so subtle that most people wouldn't have noticed. But Jordan did. She had spent a lifetime reading the smallest shifts in his behavior, the tightening of his jaw, the way his shoulders squared when he was preparing to defend something, the careful arrangement of his expression when he wanted to appear calm. Right now, he was doing all of it. Behind him, Karen stepped out more deliberately. Her posture composed, her eyes already scanning the land, not with curiosity, but with calculation. Jordan stood where she was, her hands resting lightly at her sides, her expression neutral. Ethan remained a few feet away, watching quietly, his presence steady but unobtrusive. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Michael took a step forward. Mom. The word felt unfamiliar in the air, like something that had been left unused for too long. Jordan tilted her head slightly, studying him. Michael. No warmth, no anger, just acknowledgement. Karen moved closer to him, her voice smoother. We've been looking for you, she said. Jordan's eyes shifted briefly to her, then back to Michael. Have you? Michael forced a small smile. You left without telling us where you were going, he said. We were worried. The word worried hung between them. Jordan didn't react immediately. Instead, she let the silence stretch just long enough for the truth beneath his words to surface on its own. Worried? She repeated quietly. It wasn't a question, it was an observation. Michael's smile faltered slightly. We just wanted to make sure you were okay, he added. Jordan nodded once. I am. Another pause. Karen stepped forward this time, her tone shifting, less soft, now more direct. This place, she said, glancing around, it's not exactly suitable. You shouldn't be out here alone. Jordan followed her gaze across the land, the cabin, the cleared paths, the work that had already begun to take shape. It suits me just fine. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. Michael exhaled, stepping closer. Mom, can we just talk? He said, privately. Jordan's eyes flicked briefly toward Ethan, then back to Michael. Say what you came to say. Michael hesitated. He hadn't expected resistance. Not from her. Not like this. His voice lowered slightly. This isn't the place for a conversation like this. Jordan's expression didn't change. This is exactly the place. The words settled firmly between them. Michael's patience began to crack. Fine, he said. We know about the land. There it was. Direct, unfiltered. Karen stepped in immediately. The mineral rights, the valuation, it's all been reassessed. This property is worth a significant amount of money. Jordan remained still. I'm aware. Michael's eyes sharpened. Then you understand why we need to discuss what happens next. We? The word landed harder than anything else he had said. Jordan's gaze held his. Do we? Karen's voice cut in sharper now. Jordan, let's not pretend this isn't complicated. You're not equipped to handle something like this alone. Ethan shifted slightly at that, but said nothing. Jordan noticed, but she didn't acknowledge it. Instead, she took a slow step forward. For years, she said quietly, I handled everything alone. Michael's jaw tightened. That's not what this is about. No, Jordan asked. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried. You took control of my finances, she continued. You made decisions without me. You sold my home. Michael's expression hardened defensively. We did what was necessary. Jordan nodded slowly. Yes, she said. You've said that before. Karen crossed her arms. This isn't about the past, she said. This is about what's best moving forward. Jordan's eyes shifted to her. And who decides that? Karen didn't hesitate. We do. As your family. The word family echoed hollowly in the open air. Jordan let it sit there. Then very calmly she shook her head. No, she said. The simplicity of it caught them off guard. Michael blinked. What? No, Jordan repeated. You don't. Silence. Not uncertain. Not fragile. Solid. Final. Michael stepped closer, frustration rising. Mom, you don't understand what you're dealing with here. This kind of asset, it requires management, legal oversight, negotiations. You can't just... I can, Jordan interrupted. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut through his words with precision. I can because it was designed that way. Michael stopped. What does that mean? Jordan took another step forward, closing the distance between them, not aggressively, but deliberately. It means she said that everything tied to this land, every right, every protection was put in place long before you ever tried to take control of anything. Karen's eyes narrowed slightly. What are you saying? Jordan held their gaze. I'm saying, she continued, that legally, you have no claim here. The words landed cleanly, without emotion, without hesitation. Michael's face shifted confusion first, then disbelief. That's not possible, he said. It is, Jordan replied. Karen stepped forward quickly. Then show us, she demanded. Show us the documents. Jordan didn't move. Why? Karen blinked. Because we have a right to see them. Jordan's expression remained steady. No, she said again. You don't. Michael's frustration broke through. This is insane, he snapped. We're trying to help you. Jordan's gaze didn't waver. No, she said quietly. You're trying to control something you didn't earn. The words struck deeper than anything else. Michael took a step back, his chest rising and falling more sharply now. That's not fair, he said. Jordan tilted her head slightly. Isn't it? Silence fell again. But this time it was different. Not tense, not uncertain, but resolved. Jordan's voice softened, not with weakness, but with clarity. I gave you everything, she said. Not because you asked, not because you earned it, but because I believed that's what love was. Michael's eyes flickered just briefly. Jordan saw it. But this, she gestured lightly around the land, this was never yours. Karen's voice cut in again, sharper now. So what? You're just going to keep it? All of it after everything we've done for you? Jordan looked at her, calm, unmoved. Yes. The answer was immediate, unapologetic. Karen stared at her, stunned. Michael shook his head slowly. I don't even recognize you right now, he said. Jordan met his gaze. "I think," she replied quietly, "that's because you never really saw me before." The words settled heavily between them. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Jordan took a small step back. Her posture remained steady. Her voice, when she spoke again, was softer, but no less firm. "You can leave now," she said. Michael didn't move. "Mom." "You can leave," Jordan repeated. Not louder, just clearer. Karen's hand touched Michael's arm. "Let's go," she said under her breath. Michael hesitated, but something in Jordan's expression, something final, something unshakable told him this wasn't a conversation he could win. Not anymore. Not here. Slowly, reluctantly, he turned. Karen followed. The car door shut. The engine started, and within moments, they were gone. Dust settled back onto the road. Silence returned. But this time it carried something new. Not loss, not emptiness, but closure. Jordan stood still for a moment longer. Then she exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering as the weight she had carried for so long finally began to lift. Ethan stepped closer. "You all right?" he asked. Jordan nodded. "Yes," she said. And for the first time, it was completely true. The days after Michael left were quieter than Jordan Baker expected. Not because nothing had changed, but because everything had. There was no lingering tension, no echo of unfinished words. The confrontation that had once felt inevitable had come and gone, leaving behind something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the fragile kind she had maintained for decades by avoiding conflict and sacrificing herself piece by piece, but a deeper, steadier kind. The kind that comes when truth has nothing left to hide. Jordan moved through her days with a clarity that surprised even her. The work continued steady, deliberate. The cabin, once fragile and neglected, now stood firm against the wind. The land around it slowly transformed, not into something polished or perfect, but into something alive. Paths widened. The soil softened under care. Small signs of intention replaced years of abandonment. Ethan remained a constant presence, not intrusive, not overbearing. Just there when needed, offering help without expectation, advice without control. One morning as they worked side by side reinforcing a fence line, Ethan paused, resting his weight against the wooden post. "You've done more with this place in a few weeks than anyone thought possible in years," he said. Jordan brushed dirt from her hands, glancing out across the land. "I didn't do it alone." Ethan gave a small shrug. "Most people wouldn't have even started." Jordan considered that for a moment. He wasn't wrong. There had been a time, not long ago, when she wouldn't have believed she could start over. Not at 82, not after losing everything she thought defined her life. But now, she understood something she hadn't before. Starting over isn't about age. It's about truth. And she had finally found hers. The idea came to her quietly, not as a sudden realization, but as something that had been forming in the background, waiting for the right moment to take shape. It happened one afternoon as she stood near the edge of the property, watching the horizon stretch endlessly before her. She wasn't thinking about the past. She wasn't thinking about Michael. She was thinking about people like her, people who had been left behind, forgotten, discarded once they were no longer considered useful. People who, like her, had spent their lives giving it only to find themselves with nothing when it mattered most. Her eyes drifted back toward the cabin, then across the land, and something clicked into place. "This doesn't have to be just for me," she said softly. Ethan, standing a few feet away, looked up. "What doesn't?" Jordan turned toward him, her expression thoughtful but certain. "This place," she said, "it can be more than a refuge." Ethan studied her for a moment. "What are you thinking?" Jordan took a slow breath. "A place for people who have nowhere else to go," she said. "Not a facility. Not something controlled or clinical." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Something human." Ethan nodded slowly as if he understood exactly what she meant. "A place where they're not just taken care of," he added, "but respected." Jordan's lips curved slightly. "Yes." The idea didn't feel overwhelming. It felt right, like something that had always been waiting beneath the surface, just like the land itself. The process wasn't easy. Nothing meaningful ever is. Legal steps had to be taken. Permits, planning, resources. But this time Jordan wasn't navigating it blindly. The documents Robert had left didn't just provide ownership, they provided guidance, legal protections, financial structures that ensured everything she built would remain in her control. She reached out to local officials, met with people who initially underestimated her. An 82-year-old woman proposing to build something new in a place most had forgotten. But Jordan didn't push. She didn't argue. She simply continued, step by step, decision by decision. And slowly, something remarkable began to happen. People listened, not because she demanded it, but because she proved through action that she wasn't asking for permission to exist. She was building something that mattered. Volunteers came. First one, then two, then more. Some were drawn by curiosity, others by something deeper they couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the land, maybe it was the story, or maybe it was Jordan herself, her quiet strength, her unwavering clarity, her refusal to let her past define her future. Structures began to rise. Simple at first, functional, safe, but filled with something most places like it lacked: dignity. Months passed, seasons shifted, and what had once been an abandoned property became something else entirely. A place of arrival, not for those who had lost everything, but for those who were ready to begin again. Jordan stood near the entrance one evening, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the land she had reclaimed. Voices carried softly in the distance, laughter, conversation, the quiet hum of life returning to a place that had once been silent. Ethan approached, stopping beside her. "You did it," he said. Jordan shook her head gently. "No," she replied. "I just started it." He glanced around. "Still," he said, "that's more than most people ever do." Jordan didn't respond immediately. Her gaze drifted not across the land, but beyond it, back to a life she had once believed was everything. A home that had been taken, a family that had turned away, a version of herself that had endured quietly, believing that love meant giving until there was nothing left. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel regret. Only understanding. Because losing that life had led her here. And here she had found something far greater. Herself. I think, she said softly, we spend too much time believing that the end of something is the end of everything. Ethan looked at her. And it's not. Jordan smiled faintly. No, she said. Sometimes it's just the beginning of something better. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying with it the quiet rhythm of a place no longer forgotten. And as the light faded into evening, Jordan Baker stood not as a woman who had been abandoned, but as a woman who had rebuilt her life on truth, strength, and something no one could ever take from her again. A legacy, not of loss, but of resilience,